So Venerable Chunni's BBC yesterday really sparked my mind. She talked about how we react to feedback, and it reminded me of the meditation class that Venerable Seppel and I did Monday night, and the content from the book An Open-Hearted Life that was written by Venerable Chodron and Russell Coates. This book, we've gone through it so many times, and each time there's so many pearls of wisdom that arise, and it's like, oh, so I thought to share a little bit of that today. This book is really transformative methods for compassionate living. That's what it's about, how to develop compassion. And the section of the book that we did on Monday night was Cultivating Compassion. And so basically what it talked about is if we're committed to deepening compassion, over time we want to pay attention to our thoughts. And that's kind of a, yeah, we know, duh, that's kind of a no-brainer. But, you know, when you think about it, if you pay attention to your thoughts using introspective awareness, you know, the spy in the mind, you can start recognizing when your thoughts are focused on something that you're giving it inappropriate attention, and then afflictions are arising in the mind. And we have so many different thoughts all day, some kind, some cruel, some happy, some sad, some, you know, jealous, some loving, all different kinds of thoughts. And once we have the ability to track what the thoughts are, then often we move into getting very down on ourselves and judgmental and, you know, harsh with ourselves because our mind seems like kind of a mess, you know. But at that point, right then, the next step is to cultivate acceptance. And that is so important because our ability to not have afflicted thoughts doesn't come until we're quite far along on the path. There is no way that I can control my mind so afflicted thoughts do not arise. And I would think that might be true for most people, yeah? So to just get down on ourselves because we have afflicted thoughts, that is not helpful. That really stops our progress quite a bit. And so what our practice really is to recognize when the afflictions start to arise, or have arisen and they're there, is to start applying antidotes. Learn what the antidotes are, and then start practicing to see which ones work for our particular minds. There's many, many antidotes, and some work really well, and others don't work at all for our mind. And we just have to kind of play with that to see what's going to work for our particular mind. One of the things that Russell wrote was, if we repeatedly engage in certain types of thinking, then that creates the habit to think that way in the future. And again, you know, we know that, but when we think deeply about that, what I am allowing my mind to think about and stay with then is creating a deeper and deeper habit over time. So then when I'm wondering why I can't change a habit very easily or very quickly, well, it's because of this. I've practiced that habit, you know, I'm so familiar with it. It's such a deep groove in my mind. Russell also started talking about kind of from an evolutionary standpoint, we've talked about that before some, that we have this threat-based thinking pattern. And we started doing that as a species to help us survive. And so it's very deeply grained, and often is the lens in which we look and the first knee-jerk response that we have when something happens that we're not so keen about. So this kind of threat-based thinking, it's the sort of thinking that focuses our minds on ourselves and how best to keep us comfortable in any given moment. It's self-protective, and it sees suffering and attempts to limit our exposure to it by labeling and avoiding it. So again, this evolutionary adaptive response worked really well and was very helpful when we were running around and the tigers were trying to eat us. But to have that kind of threat-based response with different kinds of interactions with people is not so helpful usually. And so he has some different ways to identify threat-based thinking. So again, it's living through the lens of fear or anxiety. Threat-based thinking judges and blames. Its perspective is very narrow, it's biased, and very tightly focused. And so when I'm in that mode, all of that, yes, that's exactly what it feels like in my body and mind. And threat-based thinking, whether it is defensive or competitive in nature, directs hostility towards others and towards ourselves also. And that's really important. When we're in that mode, when our attitude is such, then a lot of judgment arises that we throw outward and we also throw inward. And so when we have this threat-based thinking pattern, when it's arisen, then we can continue to feel threatened. We feel, and it fuels negative emotions, and it causes us to engage in even more threat-related thoughts and imagery. And that's important too, because the mind doesn't really distinguish between a picture in my mind and something actually happening that's coming through my senses. It reacts the same way. So that's why we can freak ourselves out when we think certain things. That's why when we see a scary movie and it plays in our mind again, and then we get all freaked out again, scared again because of the images. So our imagination is so powerful. And so what we want to do is to consciously bring a compassionate attitude, this state of mind, a compassionate state of mind, towards ourselves and towards others. And then that is compassionate thinking. And we can consciously conjure that up, through how we bring images or thoughts to our mind. And then that can push away the threat-based thinking, because compassion is a very stable basis, and afflicted states are not stable in the mind, so we can knock those out. Compassion will win if we practice it enough. It takes some time sometimes, but it will win. And so compassionate thinking, it considers the other person and seeks to figure out what's really going on in the situation. So it's a mind of curiosity. That's such a different feel of mind to a judgment mind, isn't it? Such a different one. So it's curious. Well, what's going on here? Why would that person say this thing or act that way? Such a different way of thinking about it. Compassionate wisdom seeks to understand suffering, what is happening, why is it happening, and what can be done to help, if anything. And so that one really is helpful when, like well, we can use the example of like politicians who are behaving very badly. It's really easy to get into the threat-based thinking and feel, threatened and get angry and judge and criticize them. But if I can bring on a compassionate attitude, then I'm going to open my perspective and start thinking about what is it in this person's life that brought them to this particular way of thinking and behaving. And then when I think that way, then I'm leveling the playing field. I'm thinking, oh, they're just like me. They don't want to suffer, and they want some happiness just like I do. And so it takes out the judgment piece and brings more equanimity, which is so helpful to the mind. And it's helpful to the mind because when I'm able to do that, then I'm more in alignment with reality. Because that is the reality, that we all, no matter where we come from, how we behave, what our deal is, we all want happiness and we don't want to suffer. That's what connects every living being. Yeah. Humans and animals, insects, everyone. So compassionate thinking is very broad and flexible. And just think about that for a minute. What does it feel like in your body and mind when you have a broad perspective and a lot of flexibility? Things go quite easily, usually, yeah. And we're more open and we're more connected to those around us, I think. So we can train ourselves to consider and understand any situation from different perspectives. And that's an interesting one to play with. So a situation arises, and instead of a threat-based response, then in my mind I walk around and look at all of the different things that could have brought this about and all of the things that influenced this to happen. And again, that's a productive and very helpful way to get the mind out of a judgment place into, causes and conditions. Things arise that way. And then that's very helpful. Compassionate thinking can move back and forth between empathizing and problem solving, between directing warmth and acceptance to those who are suffering, and to seek some pragmatic solutions to address the causes and conditions that create and maintain that suffering. Now, this one's a dicey one. This is a little difficult because if I step in and want to fix something when I haven't established a connection with the person and haven't empathized with them so that we are kind of on the same wavelength, then a fixing attitude is not going to help at all. It's going to fall flat. There's going to be defense. It's not going to work. I know this because I've practiced this a lot. Yeah, it does not work. Yeah, ever. So I think if we haven't developed this compassionate thinking and put some thought into some equanimity, then the best thing that we can offer is to empathize and learn how to do that to another. And then we'll keep a connection. And that's the most important thing, isn't it? To keep the connection. Then we're all in our happy place, I think. So compassionate thinking involves both understanding and action. It balances warm, kind understanding with the need to actively address sources of suffering. And then this sentence, I love what Russell wrote. Thinking with compassion means being able to discern when swift, assertive action is needed and when it is best to let a situation work itself out without our interference. That's the wisdom place, isn't it? How many times have we stepped in and had the solution or whatever, and boy, did that fall flat. And then other times when we had a little wisdom running and we watched it, and it seemed like maybe it's kind of a train wreck, but you just watch and people figure it out, and it works just fine, and no one dies, and it's okay. So compassionate thinking is kind, warm, gently encouraging. It's focused on building connections between people and can recognize and validate different perspectives. So if you're going to go into an activity where there's a lot of people talking, if we would just train ourselves to remember that, oh, I'm going to hear a lot of different perspectives, many that I'm not going to be familiar with, or maybe I'll have a reaction to or a judgment about, but let me just try to accept with some flexibility all these different perspectives. I could do that. I could practice that. So whereas threat-based thinking focuses on proving ourselves right to avoid feeling vulnerable or embarrassed, compassionate thinking seeks to understand the wisdom that lies behind others' perspectives. Compassionate wisdom recognizes that appreciating diversity and differences doesn't threaten our own conviction. That's also an interesting sentence. So if I appreciate somebody else's diversity or their differences, I don't need to be threatened. I can just open to that, have a wide perspective, and it doesn't have to make me feel threatened on any level. And then if I could do that, and even if it's somebody that is doing something that is so totally different than I would ever do, but if I can just open to that, then I'm going to keep a connection with that person. And if we stay connected, then we can help transform each other. That's what happens, I think. So if we can just identify when threat-based thinking is driving the mind and we consciously bring a compassionate attitude into our mind, then we can stay connected. It mirrors reality. We'll keep a kind of a wide perspective on things. We'll be more flexible. And if we do that, then we're going to indeed develop our compassion, progress on this beautiful path, and at one point we will become fully awakened, in which it will be so easy to benefit others, and we will go from joy to joy to joy to joy. And so let's practice this.